Hello, good day everyone. This time we are going to report the chapter 13, which is the transfer of learning. So the topic concept is transfer of learning from one performance situation to another is an integral part of skill, learning, and performance. So, after completing this chapter, we will be able to first is to define transfer of learning as it applies to the learning of motor skills. Number two, to discuss why transfer of learning is an important concept for motor learning. Number three, um, to discuss two reasons proposed to explain why transfer occurs. And number four is we will be able to define negative transfer and relate it to motor skill learning situation. So now let's proceed to the application. So, why do we practice a skill? One reason is to increase our capability of performing the skill in a situation requiring it. So, we want to be able to accomplish specific action when we need to, whether we perform every skills or everyday skills, work skills or sports skills. So I have three example of this. The first one is if you were a physical therapist working with the gait problem of a stroke patient, you would want that person to be able to walk an environment outside the clinic. The patient should be able to walk at home, at the workplace, at the grocery store, and even in the mall. So that is the first scenario. And the second scenario is if you were an athletic trainer, it would be essential for you to prepare the injured athletes you are rehabilitating to perform his or her sports skills and competition. And the second scenario is if you were a basketball coach, you would um, you would want your player to play well in games as well as in practice. So each of these examples involve the concept of transfer of learning because of the need of transfer learn capabilities in one environment or situation to a different environment or situation. In fact, one of the goal of practicing a skill is developing the capability to transfer for performance to the skill from the practice environment of some other environment in which the individual must perform the skills so that he or she can achieve the same action goal. So, let's proceed to the discussion. Transfer of learning is one of the most universally applied principle of learning in education, sports, and rehabilitation, and rests on the simple premise that all new learning occurs against the backdrop of prior learning. So, um, transfer of learning is a universal applied principle, not only in education and sport, but also in rehabilitation. So, as a result, prior learning can help hinder or have no effect on new learning. Transfer of learning is an important part of curriculum and instruction development in educational system because it provides the foundation of arranging the sequence in which student will learn skills. In sports and the transfer of principle serves as the foundation of the sequencing of skills to be learned. the performing of drills to perform the type of practice experience athletes required prior of participating in a game of or in a match. So in chapter 11, we use the concept of transfer of learning when we discuss transfer tests as a method of assessing learning. Those tests are based on the transfer of learning principles. That discussion provide you with a good basis for the present discussion, which will provide you with an understanding of the transfer of learning principle itself. So now let's proceed to what is transfer of learning? So transfer of learning is a phenomenon of learning more quickly and developing a deeper understanding of the task if we bring some knowledge or skill from previous learning to a new learning situation. Therefore, to produce positive transfer of learning, we need to practice under a variety of conditions and environments. So, this influence may be positive, negative, or neutral or zero. Positive transfer occurs when previous experience facilitates the learning of a new skills or the performance of a skill in a new context. Each of the example presented in the application section at the beginning of this chapter, as what I have tackled earlier, involved positive transfer. So negative transfer occurs when previous experience hinder or interfere with the learning of a new skill or the performance of a skill in a new context. So, for example, is a person who has learned forehand in tennis before learning forehand in badminton often experiences some initial negative transfer for learning to mechanics of the stroke. So, as we all know, tennis is and tennis racket is very heavy, and the badminton is not just heavy, so it has a big difference. So the badminton forehand is a wrist snap, whereas the tennis forehand requires a relatively firm wrist. The third type of transfer of learning affects its zero transfer, which occurs when previous experience has no influence on the learning of a new skills or the performance of a skill in a new context. So, why is transfer of learning important? We point out earlier that principle of transfer of learning is an important part of educational curriculum development and instructional methodology. So the development of pre-competition practices in sports and the development and implementation of rehabilitation protocols. Thus, the practical point of view, the transfer principle is very significant for establishing effect, motor skills, learning environments. But the transfer principle also has theoretical significance because it helps us understand process underlying the learning and control of motor skills. The transfer principle has also been central to our understanding of how children acquire more and more complex and context specific skills during the process of motor development. So, sequencing skills to be learned. A sequencing of mathematics skills provide a very useful practical example of the transfer principle as it relates to curriculum and development in schools. So the curriculum from grades K through 12 is based on a simple to complex sequence. teachers present numeral identification, numeral writing, numeral value identification, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, in which specific sequence, because each concept is based on the concepts that preceded it. A person presented with a division problem needs to know how to add, subtract, and multiply in order to solve the problem. So we do not teach algebra before basic arithmetic. So we do not teach trigonometry before geometry. So that means that there is a sequence skills to be learned. And this time, let's hear Mr. Roman to continue the discussion.